This Zoom replay video was originally recorded May 2020, presented by Dale Borglum, the Living Dying Project, and Tibet House US Menla Online. To learn more about upcoming online and in-person offerings, please visit menla.org.
Borglum, Director of the Living Dying Project. Welcome. So good to be with all you guys. I would like to leave more than just a few minutes at the end for questions and answers, maybe a quarter of an hour or so. Looking at the description here, originally this was going to be a weekend. I was going to fly from California to Woodstock, Albany, be there at Menla, but obviously people aren't flying around doing that right now. So we divided it up into 5 consecutive Wednesday evenings. And I am going to present tools for working with uncertainty. Basically, when we're feeling uncertain, uncertainty often leads to stress. And then the question is, when we're feeling stress, does that create anxiety? Does that create fear? Or can we use meditative spiritual tools to work with stress so that it doesn't particularly create fear? I've been meditating for a long time, and after some decades of meditation, and actually some frustration, if you will, I really got to the sense that I was a really good meditator, but I have a hard time integrating my practice into my daily life. I was great on the cushion. I'd get out there in real life, and a lot of patterns kept following me from the meditation hall out to my job, my relationships, etc. Finally, I really began to explore embodied mindfulness, getting in my body. And my experience has been that many people, myself included, are attracted to spiritual practice because we're trying to get away from suffering. We want to be happier. We want to be more compassionate people. And the attraction then is to going into the heart, finding those qualities that are qualities of love, of expansiveness, of surrender. But these Asian practices that are so popular from Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Vipassana meditation, Hinduism, were developed by and for Asian people a few thousand years ago, mostly, who were grounded and centered, were walking around barefoot, were loving their parents. They didn't have an iPhone, they didn't have a car. And it was just assumed that when you began practice, you were connected to the earth, you were grounded, you were embodied, you were inhabiting the lower chakras, so you could start exploring this letting go of identification with ego structure and beginning to identify with our true nature. This letting go of all these patterns of who we think we are and beginning to identify with pure consciousness itself. But I think it doesn't take too much imagination that if we're beginning this process from this neurotic start point where we don't really like ourselves, where we're kind of still having psychological issues that are popping up all the time, that it will get kind of complicated not too far down the line. And in fact, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said on his 3rd visit to America many years ago, he said, "Now I'm beginning to understand that it makes me very sad. You Americans don't like yourselves." So imagine then starting this practice of letting go of who we think we are when we don't like ourselves. Clearly, it gets complicated. So I've been finding, and particularly during this time of pandemic, when there's so much uncertainty out there, so much stress, I've been finding that working with embodiment, working with getting into the lower chakras, working with grounding and centering is a necessary foundation for then opening the heart, then going into the tantric stages of Vajrayana, being empowered, and finally going into non-duality where true healing happens. So that during the course of these 5 Wednesdays, if enough people choose to sign up, we need 10 people going forward for the next 4 Wednesdays. We will be exploring going beyond burnout, working with fear, fear versus faith, how to transmute grief into compassion, working with fear of death, working with physical pain and how that relates to our sense of self, the nature of death, how to prepare for it, resting in spacious awareness. I'm the director of the Living Dying Project. We offer free of charge spiritual support to people who are approaching the end of life. Many years ago, back in the 1970s and 80s, Stephen Levine, Ram Dass, and myself started the conscious dying movement, at first in Santa Cruz, California. Then we moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I became the director of something called the Dying Center. And if you're interested in the dying part of it, or if you're just even interested in this meditative exploration we're going to be doing together, our website, livingdying.org, is the most complete website on the internet with information about conscious dying. There's a lot of free lectures, guided meditations, and I also have a podcast channel on Ram Dass's Be Here Now Network, BeHereNowNetwork.com, the Dale Borglum channel, Healing at the Edge. So there's a lot of information out there, and we will be exploring that in a very focused way during these next few Wednesday evenings. So this is a webinar. I can't see you. I wish that it had been set up as a meeting so I could see who I'm talking to. It's a little bit strange talking to myself on a computer. And is there any way that I can find out how many, Wyatt, is there any way I can find out how many people are meditators? How many people out there have an ongoing meditation practice? Could you raise your hands or do something that Wyatt can tell me?
Yeah, so if everybody wants to raise their hand, or you can post in the chat, I meditate, we can see that as well. It looks like you got just about everybody with hands up. So
okay,
everybody's a meditator.
Good. So that makes life a lot easier that we're kind of on the same page here. So let's think of a hypothetical small child who's being born. The first couple trimesters, second and third trimester in the womb, and the first couple years of life, this little child, the energetic lesson is learning to be grounded, learning to trust, surrendering down into the root chakra. That is the antidote to fear, to anxiety. Right now, there is a lot of fear in society. And to the extent that there was any trauma, neglect, accidents, illness, any events in the first few years of your life or my life where we didn't feel totally supportive, then very likely we didn't go very deeply into this quality of being grounded. And when uncertainty arises, when shock, when startle, when different threatening experiences arise, we tend to go into fear. And what I have found is that fear is really the main obstacle to beginning meditation practice, because in a way, meditation practice is about death of the ego structure, of letting go of who we think we are, this illusion of separateness, and dying into wholeness. So that on one hand, there's fear. On the other hand, there's faith. Being grounded, you have faith that you are supported. You have trust. In Buddhism, before we begin to practice, people often take refuge. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. And then you do that a second time and a third time. So taking refuge in the Buddha, it's not the historical guy. It's taking refuge in the fact that freedom exists and that we can trust that there is this freedom, and the Dharma is there is a path to that. And the Sangha, we have the support of other people on the path. So that moment to moment, do we have faith? Faith in God, faith in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, faith in Christ, faith in the Divine Mother, faith in your own true nature, higher power of the 12 steps? Or do we have fear? One can begin to watch this movement. One begin to notice, particularly somatically, what does it feel like when there is a sense of anxiety? what does it feel like when there's a sense of faith? Faith to me has a quality of spaciousness, spacious heart, stability down below, supporting that spaciousness. So the first practice that I would like to explore, and we can call it a meditation or not, but the first practice is getting grounded. As we're talking right now, is it possible that as you're breathing, you can imagine that you're pushing energy out through the base of your torso into the earth on the out breath? And as you're breathing in, you're allowing this grounding, supportive, nurturing energy to come up into you and give you the sense of support so that you can move forward and do what you need to do. Each out breath, just dropping down, imagining that you're pushing energy out through the base of the torso, almost as if you were laying an egg. You might find it useful in the beginning to tighten the muscles in the perineum and the upper adductors, the upper inner thigh muscles, just so you can feel this part of your body. It's not a muscular exercise. It's an exercise in inhabiting a part of our energy body that many of us have abandoned. So that what we're doing is creating a foundation that we will be exploring in the weeks to come to go into the spaciousness of the heart, the vulnerability of the heart, with a sense of confidence, with a sense of, I don't need the environment to be supportive for me to keep my heart open. I can keep my heart open during a pandemic or in a relationship where I'm not being supported in each moment. So what does it feel like to do this dropping down? Is it possible to be hearing what I'm saying, understanding what I'm saying, dropping down into the root chakra, dropping down into the earth, inhabiting your legs and your feet, and just with the in-breath then receiving this blessing that is always available, this sense of the earth, earth mother, mother, mother. To the extent that you had difficulties in the first couple of years of your life, this will be challenging. And almost everybody I've ever met has had issues during this time of their lives. I had very loving parents, but I'll tell you a few things that happened to me. My earliest memory in life, I was crawling across the floor. I was feeling really happy and almost joyful. I was such a great crawler. I felt I was just enjoying being in my body. I can remember the sun was coming in diagonally from the windows on the right side of the room. I can remember the pattern of the carpet. I can see my dad over there through the bathroom door shaving. And on the floor in front of me was this metal object with these two prongs. It was a hairpin. You probably know where this is going. And I saw in front of me on the wall two holes that were just as far apart as this thing I picked up. So I thought, well, obviously this goes in there. Isn't this great? I mean, this is not, it was pre-verbal, but I was very excited that I had found this puzzle that worked. I put it in there, and my earliest memory is being knocked across the room by the electricity. A few months later, I was being bottle fed. I dropped the baby bottle. In those days, they were made out of glass. It broke. And by the time my parents could sterilize another bottle and heat up some formula, it was past the feeding window when Dr. Spock said, here's when you're supposed to feed a kid. So they didn't feed me for 4 hours. And I cried and cried. I was hungry. They didn't feed me. They were trying to do the right thing. So even having loving parents, there were these messages that the world's not a safe place. You should be careful. You should be alert. You should be hyper alert. You can't trust just being grounded. You've got to really pay attention in a kind of anxious way. So just out of curiosity, does anybody have any chat comments about what it feels like to be grounded? And that interplay here between faith and fear. Faith and fear. Is there faith in this dropping down? Is there faith in inhabiting a part of your body that allows you to have a sense of that it's safe to be dependent? Does anybody have anything to say? Okay, looks like I'm going to be doing more monologue. That's okay. So this quality of faith, I would really ask you to, as a practice, if whether you come next week or not, for the next week, notice what it feels like when there's faith, where you can just be surrendering, dying into the next moment, versus when there's no faith, where I've got to do it, where there's a sense of some urgency or some sense of uncertainty, some sense of stress, that you're not feeling that there is that kind of support. And in some way, faith is really at the bottom of practice. It's what allows us to do mindfulness meditation. I've been talking about faith in a somatic sense of dropping down into the lower chakra, but at the same time, if we look at mindfulness meditation, it's based on an unspoken assumption, a very optimistic assumption, that all we need to do is pay attention. And healing will flow from that. We don't need to figure things out. We don't need to change things. That our inherent nature is whole. And all we have to do is be aware of what's going on. And in this awareness, we will then become mindful of how suffering arises. And as we become more aware of how suffering arises, we'll begin to work with that in a very natural way. So, as I said before, I often work with people who are really sick, approaching death. Cancer does not cause suffering. Resistance to cancer causes suffering. Divorce does not cause suffering. Resistance to divorce causes suffering. And I would suggest that, yes, it is human nature that you or I would have some resistance to cancer, would have some resistance to divorce, have some resistance to a whole array of unpleasant experiences. But if in fact we're feeling that the suffering is coming because of the cancer, it becomes very difficult to heal that suffering, because that's not how the suffering's arising. We're not looking at the cause. We're looking at the trigger. It's so easy when fear arises to be fixated with the trigger that is causing the fear. So that in Tibetan Buddhism, they have these Lojong mind training slogans. And one of them is, drive all blames into oneself. And what they mean by that, drive all blames into oneself, is not that you're blaming yourself, but if you're blaming the environment, you're blaming the traffic, you're blaming the government, you're blaming the weather, you're blaming what's going on in your body for how you're feeling, then healing isn't going to be happening, because you're fixated on the object, not on your response to the object. Can you become aware of, can you reclaim the blame and say, okay, here's the way I'm responding to these unpleasant circumstances here. Can I work with this? And one of the ways to do this, one of the most direct ways that I have found, is working with physical discomfort. If you're ill, if you're tired, if you've got an injury, if you stub your toe, so many ways. You've got pain in your body, you're meditating for a long time, your knee is really hurting a lot. Can you begin to explore your reaction to that physical pain? In fact, very often you can find two people and they have the same dental procedure, the same medical procedure. They react in profoundly different ways, because there's a combination of pain and fear of pain. And what's often being medicated or reacted to is at least as much the fear as it is the pain itself. So that working with the body is a very direct and robust and available way to start working with your fear of unpleasantness, your fear of not being in control. And so some of the time when you're meditating, maybe just set a timer and say, I am not going to move for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Your body will start complaining. Just watch that process. Even you could try lying flat on your back on a bed, most comfortable bed you can find, flat on your back, no pillows. And can you lie there for 30 or 40 minutes without moving? In yoga, they say that, strangely enough, the most difficult yogic posture to do properly is the corpse pose, because it's to do it properly, correctly, it's required that you relax, which is what we can't do. Okay. So grounding. So somebody's saying they find it difficult to ground in your apartment, even though you're a Qigong instructor. And I will admit that it's easier to be grounded when you're standing with your bare feet on the earth, you're at the beach, you're out in the yard, you're walking on the earth. But at the same time, this chi that is the earth element comes up the earth into the foundation of the building. It comes up the walls, it's in the floor. The chi is everywhere. I mean, you can be grounded in an airplane at 35,000 feet. It's your body, your energy body, you're willing to drop down into the root chakra. And as I say, for most of us, there is woundedness there. So I would suggest for everybody that when you're dying, you might not be in an ideal place to be grounded. You might not have your bare feet flat on the earth. You might be in a hospital room. You might be in a car where the person you love the most is next to you screaming in terror. You might be lying on the floor of the CVS pharmacy and a stranger is ripping your shirt off and pounding on your chest and breathing in your mouth. You might be in a hospital bed with so much morphine in your bloodstream that it's hard to focus your mind. So that even though it's harder to be grounded on the upstairs of an apartment somewhere, or when you're in an automobile, or when you're interacting with a computer, say, it's possible to do that. And grounding is not really a 0-1 process. It's not like either I'm grounded or I'm not grounded. It's a whole spectrum of I'm 0% grounded to 100% grounded. I remember about a few months ago, I have a group that I teach every Monday night in San Francisco, in a part of town where the parking is really bad. And so I get there early so I can find a parking place. And I found a parking place right off the bat, so I had some extra time to kill. And I'm walking up and down the sidewalk, and there was a guy standing on the sidewalk, really crowded summer day, a lot of people coming and going up the sidewalk, people have their phones out, people are in cafes. And there's this man standing on the side of the sidewalk, and you could just feel how profoundly grounded he was. He was not saying anything, he was not moving, but you could just feel his energy was so profoundly present. And it was almost shocking in comparison to everybody else who was so busy going somewhere or coming from somewhere or up in their heads trying to figure things out. And just in relationship to the way most of us live most of the time. And I have a PhD in mathematics, which is the result of me having been in Berkeley and Stanford for 10 years. So that after that time, I was like so ungrounded. My mind was a shambles from just studying mathematics, even though I was doing a lot of meditation at the same time. And it was really only when I got in this somatic work, like 20 or 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years after getting out of graduate school, that I was beginning to be able to integrate meditation into my daily life. That until you have this connectedness with the earth, you can have these remarkable meditative experiences. You can sit in your room and have compassion for everybody who has coronavirus. You can have compassion for people who are so concerned that I'm not going to be able to feed my children. And then you get up, you try to go outside, and poof, it all falls apart. So that the line I use that seems to get almost everybody upset is that when you are dying, Donald Trump will be at your bedside. And obviously, it's highly unlikely that he's physically going to be there. But is the concept of Donald Trump, for good or bad, depending on what side of the aisle you sit on, is that concept so strong and so unconscious that as soon as you hear it, you get ungrounded? It throws you into the mind. Or maybe it's not Donald Trump. Maybe it's your father. Maybe it's some other person that it has been not forgiven from something they've done or that they haven't done. And we will be using grounding and centering as the foundation for beginning to eventually then open the heart. How would you recommend healing the root chakra in terms of realized intention? To be honest with you, I don't really quite know what that means. Everybody has a different energetic structure. If you get quiet enough and let your attention scan through your body, you will find places where you have a hard time feeling anything at all. There's other places there will be flow and ease, other places there will be tension. My particular type, I had a hard time in the beginning really inhabiting my lower belly, my hara. It took me years of surrendering, dropping down in there, and it felt very uncomfortable, very unsafe. But every time I would actually do it, it felt fantastic. It's just that there was this conceptual thing of you don't want to be in that part of your body. So this meditation that we've just been talking about, this grounding breath of, as you breathe out, let your energy drop down through the root chakra into the earth, breathing in, receiving the grounding supportive energy, breathing out, dropping down. I don't know if I can say too much more than that thing. Certainly, if you have Lyme disease, if you have chronic fatigue, if you're really tired a lot, your energy might not be as strong as it was before. I get that. But every experience is open to awareness. Every experience you or I could have is open to compassion. The quality, the subtlety, the depth of the awareness and the compassion might not be the same if you're really tired, or if you're really sick, or if you're really restless. I get that. But so in Theravada Buddhism, there are these things called the 5 hindrances. They're the 5 obstacles to really meditating. There's a pair of 2, then there's another pair of 2, and then there's one of them that's so dangerous it's all there by itself. So the first pair is restlessness, agitation on one hand, on the other hand, sloth and torpor. Okay, tiredness, low energy, and on the other hand, high energy, restlessness. That's fairly clear that if you go too far in either direction, it makes it harder to be present. On the other hand, there's another pair. One of them is grasping, the other one is aversion. Grasping unconsciously to the things that you love and want more of, pushing away things you want less of. The 5th one is doubt. And that is, you're doubting that you can practice, you're doubting that you're strong enough, you're doubting that you know the teachings well enough, you're doubting the teaching, you're doubting the teacher. And almost always doubt short circuits the whole practice itself. So suppose you have Lyme disease, you have low energy, and you say, I don't think I can meditate now. I can barely get out of bed. My energy is low, my awareness is not strong. Can you be aware of that voice? Can you be aware of your response to that voice? Can you, in the weeks to come, we'll be talking much more about compassion, having an open-hearted, connected, spacious relationship with even voices such as compassion, such as doubt, I'm sorry, compassionate relationship with doubt. But for the time being, we're just talking about being grounded. And being grounded is challenging because it is, in a way, pulling energy away from the head and dropping down into the lower part of the body. The ego likes you to be up in the head. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." And people, me, everybody, often uses the mind as a way of pushing away the abyss, the spaciousness that is the nature of mind. There's this fundamental ongoing tension between the fundamentally spacious, groundless nature of reality and the fixed stance of the ego structure. The ego structure is saying, "I think, therefore I am. Let's keep thinking to reify that I'm actually here." Whereas in reality, if we're just surrendering into the next moment, surrendering in the next moment, the ego structure doesn't have a lot of room to feel itself reified and validated. So consequently, even before we begin to practice, there's often a section of pre-practice about motivation. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are what are the 4 mind-turning truths that turn our mind toward the Dharma, toward exploring the truth. And the first one of these is you're going to die, but you don't know when. Very obvious intellectually. But right now during coronavirus pandemic, you're going to die, but you don't know when. That's really being put right in people's faces. People, everybody knows intellectually you're going to die, but we always think, well, it's not today, it's not tomorrow, it's somewhere out there. But now there's this invisible, or unless you have an electron microscope, almost invisible virus that could sneak in with the mail or the groceries or on your friend or whatever it might be. And who knows how close death is? Can we take that as something that inspires us to be more alive, to be more awake, to really want to practice? I mean, if in fact, what is it now? We've got about another 20 some minutes to go in this get together we're having, that there is a chance that many of us in this room are never going to be together again. This is our chance to connect, to love each other, to love ourselves in the presence of each other. And how much do we avail ourselves of that opportunity? On the other hand, how much do we pull back and say, well, I don't know these people, and or do that kind of thing? So that in a way, coronavirus is a great inspiration to practice if we let it be that. If we let it be that instead of saying, oh my God, I just want to do a lot of Netflix and drink a lot of wine and not really pay attention here because it's so scary. I mean, can we really begin to use the uncertainty as a deep motivation for practice? The second of these mind-turning truths is that life is precious. We've got a body that's strong enough, a mind that's clear enough, a heart that's open enough that we can begin to understand the teaching. The Buddha said only 1 out of 1,000 people really sets foot on the path in a meaningful way. And out of 1,000 people who set foot on the path, only 1 reaches the end. That's 1 out of 1,000,000. Now, I don't know if the odds have gotten better or worse since the time of the Buddha. But let's say it's the same odds. Like only 1 out of 1,000 people really starts to practice. And here we are. We've got the teaching. Can we use this precious teaching, use this precious body and mind to awaken now? The third and fourth mind-turning truths are there's suffering when we grasp, and there is karma. What we do, think, or say has an effect. So you can take any one of these mind-turning truths and take it as a contemplation, not just as an obvious fact. But let's take the first one now. It's so appropriate during this time. You're going to die, but you don't know when. What does that mean in terms of how you're taking the next breath, how you're seeing your child or your lover or your parent or your neighbor, or you're turning on the television set and seeing our president or the head of the Senate, dear Mitch McConnell, or whoever all these people are out there who are seemingly don't have a compassionate bone in their bodies. How do we respond to that if we really don't know how long we're going to be alive? My first meditation teacher, Suzuki Roshi, said the most important thing is finding the most important thing. What is the most important thing? What is the most important thing for you? Is it being happy? Is it the truth? Is it liberation? As long as we're grasping at happiness, we're having to juggle. Is this a happy making or a not happy making experience? And yet, if we're seeking the truth, then each thing can be open to, everything can be open to. So first thing is strong motivation, and then embodied awareness, embodied presence, embodied mindfulness in the sense of getting grounded. And then the next step, coming up to the hara, the lower belly, being centered, the place from which martial arts are done. We could talk about that a lot more next week, but let me slow down here a second. We've got 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes to go, and I'd just like to open this up. I really am not big on long monologues, and we only have an hour here today. So I'd like to ask you guys to either use the chat function, and Wyatt can pick out any good questions for me, and the Q&A thing. There's no open questions. So does anybody have remarks or questions? We could also do a guided meditation at the end of the day here, but I would love to open this up a little bit.
Yeah, so if anybody did have questions, like Dale said, you can post into the Q&A section. We'll also both be keeping our eyes on the chat, so if you wanted to post it there as well, we can also do that.
Okay, so this notion of being grounded, as interesting as it is not necessarily what you want to bring into the world, because being grounded is the foundation for being centered, which is going to be the foundation for opening the heart. But being grounded by itself is remaining in this dependent place. It's the foundation for allowing you then to become centered, the place of manifestation, the antidote to guilt and shame. And we live in a culture where there is a lot of guilt and shame. There's particularly women are often socialized to apologize a lot, to try to please people. Maybe not so much people born in the last 30 years or so, but I have so many people in my groups who are really racked with guilt and shame, and it's just an ongoing process to can one bring awareness to this voice that is so deeply conditioned. There's this notion of the superego. Can you expand a little more on embodied awareness and how to reach it? So that's what we're talking about now. So that I've got a healing paradigm that we can explore healing from the standpoint of the body, from the mind, or from devotion, living spirit. So from the standpoint of the mind, it's like Vipassana meditation, psychotherapy, studying the scriptures in a certain way. From the standpoint of the body, it's martial arts, hatha yoga, bodily energetics with somatic practices. And what I'm suggesting here is that for many people in the West, because these Eastern practices that are so popular are assuming that you're already grounded and centered, for many people in the West, they get into trouble by just jumping in. I'm going to open my heart. I'm going to do empowerment practices. I'm going to do Chinrezi practice, or I'm going to do compassion practice. And until you have this foundation that allows you to bear the profound vulnerability and spaciousness that is the nature of the heart, then the heart will be open only when the environment is being supportive. If the environment is not supportive, it's going to feel too dangerous to keep the heart open. So that what I found is my meditation teacher says, hey, you're a great meditator, but I'd leave the meditation room and it would all fall apart. And it was only when I found some of these somatic practices of, first of all, doing this grounding breath that I'm talking about. And then there's a centering breath where it's very similar. As you're breathing out, you drop down into the hara, the lower belly, a few inches below your navel, a few inches inside the front of the body, the place that allows a tiny, frail, elderly martial arts master to defeat a huge, hulking, young, strong novice, because he's not doing it. The martial arts master is allowing the chi, the Shakti of the universe, to flow through him or her and allow healing, allow movement to happen. So as we're talking right now, can you, as you breathe out, can you drop down into the lower belly? Maybe even put your hand down there, right below, maybe put like your thumb on your navel and your fingers down below your navel. And as you breathe in and out, you just drop down into the place with the out breath, easy, natural in breath. And as we're doing that, can you keep a constant sense of strength in the lower belly, whether you're breathing in or out, even imagining that you had like a big, huge blood pressure cuff going around your lower belly. And the pressure was the same, whether you were breathing in or breathing out. It's a step beyond diaphragmatic breathing. It's maintaining chi strength down in the hara. Hara literally means sea of chi. You're dropping down there and finding a balance between right strength and right relaxation, right tension and right relaxation, of not just collapsing when we breathe out, but maintaining strength there. So that usually when we're caught in the eye, there's tension in the lower belly, the shoulders come up, and by doing this belly breathing, hara breathing, centering breath, one lets go in the shoulders, lets go in the lower belly, but maintains strength in the lower belly, which then will allow us as the next stage to begin to open the heart. So in the womb to 2 years old, learning to be grounded, antidote to fear and anxiety, inhabiting the root chakra. 18 months to roughly 5 years old, and these are approximate numbers, learning to be centered, learning to be active in the world, going from being dependent to being independent and autonomous, the antidote to guilt and shame, a much more appropriate energetic stance for being in the world, getting things done. Then at the age of 5 or so, this little child is learning now conscious relationship from like 5 to 8 or 9. And one can see, I think really intuitively and clearly, that if you're not autonomous, if you're not centered, that the vulnerability and the profound, boundless, spacious nature of the heart are going to be overwhelming if there's not a solid person there to open. And that you and people you know and me are people who at times are really open-hearted, and then there's some threat that comes along and the heart closes. It's opening and closing, and it's very confusing being in relationship with somebody whose heart is opening and closing like that. Okay, so any more questions?
Yeah, so Dale, there are a few coming up in the chat. So there was one saying, can you ground at other chakras? For instance, the sun chakra, the light, the third eye.
Well, one can inhabit all of the different chakras, but grounding is the very word grounding implies this connection with the earth, and beyond that, receiving the blessing of the ground, the earth element, the mother with a capital M. And centering the second and third chakras, the name itself once again implies that you're centered, so that you're inhabiting the center. Thinking is happening, perceptions are happening, emotions are happening, external life is happening, but you're not being thrown off center by all the activity. It's like the still point at the center of the cyclone. Being inhabiting the heart is inhabiting the sky-like heart mind. Pema Chodron has this great quote where she says, "You're the sky, everything else is just the weather." So that, yeah, the heart is as vast as the sky, and then lightning comes, or thunder comes, or sunshine comes, or fog comes, and all these things are coming and going, but the sky doesn't ever change. So that anything you can pay attention to, that's the weather. You can pay attention to your body. The body's an object. You can pay attention to your mind. That's an object. You pay attention to your emotions or perceptions. What is the subject? Who is it that is having these experiences? So that the answer to that question kind of applies to what's just being brought up here, is that when you do learn to inhabit and rest in, say, the wisdom eye, or the thousand petal lotus, or the throat chakra, that this wisdom of the nature of things, that who you actually are, is not being lost in activity, lost in the duality of human existence, but it's resting in pure consciousness. That becomes revealed. But these are developmental stages. And what I'd like to explore for those of you guys who are going to show up for the next weeks is this developmental path where it's hard to keep the heart open and be vulnerable if you haven't become able to inhabit the belly and be centered and be independent. And it's hard to be independent if you haven't trusted being dependent and trusting the mother. And it's hard to be dependent if you don't have a strong enough motivation to work with the resistance that's going to come from this dropping down, because the ego wants you to stay up there reifying all the time. So these are developmental stages, whether we're talking about the chakras, the yanas in Buddhism, early stages of early childhood development that Piaget and other people talk about. All of these healing paths are saying the same thing in lockstep. We can explore it from the standpoint of the body, from the heart, devotion, compassion, gratitude, from the standpoint of the mind, of studying the scriptures, just pure awareness. Other questions?
Yeah, got one more in the Q&A.
Yeah.
So he's had awakenings in stable life circumstances. He's also had awakenings during trauma. He's practiced martial Tai Chi. His question is, how do you let go of obsessive fear? How do you trust the mother beyond practice time?
So as I was saying before, there's this ongoing balance between faith and fear. And there's a couple ways to work with fear. There's the way of, what does fear itself feel like? What does it feel like in the body? And almost always there's a tightness in the belly. There's a sense the shoulders are coming up. And when you say obsessive fear, my sense is the implication is that it's very hard to be aware of it. It's happening kind of automatically. So that, first of all, we don't work with the big fear that's totally overwhelming. You start out Can you work with more minor anxiety? Can you be with more minor anxiety? And the process is, it's a 2 or 3 step process. The first step is, can you let go of fixation, obsessive fixation on the trigger, that which you're saying is causing me to be afraid, and be with the fear itself. What does it feel like in your body? What does it feel like in your mind? Can you move toward it? And that is, in a way, the big paradox of spiritual life, that healing happens not by trying to get away from suffering, but by moving into it, by meeting it with clarity and then with compassion. So the first step is let go of the trigger, let go of the story, let go of the narrative. What does this feel like? And then the second step is, can I have compassion for the part of me that has been lost in this obsessive fear? Can I open my heart to that? And we will, in the weeks to come, spend a lot of time talking about what is compassion, how to cultivate compassion, what are the defining qualities of compassion, of connectedness, of spaciousness, of warmth, of equalizing and switching yourself with another person. So, and then finally, there's after the heart opens enough, there can be a tantric relationship with fear, where you see that fear itself is just one face of the deity. It's just instantaneously transmuted into a sacred energy. So from the Theravada perspective, letting go of the narrative, feeling what it's like, Vipassana, mindfulness meditation, here's what fear is. Then Mahayana, having compassion, gradually transforming fear through compassion, moving on to Vajrayana, tantric stage of the fear itself, any energy, anger, anything, is a misunderstanding of sacred energy. The other way to work with fear, when fear arises, can you deepen faith? What do you have faith in? Maybe you have faith in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Maybe you have faith in Jesus. Maybe you have faith in your own true nature. Maybe you have faith in the 12-step higher power. Maybe you have faith in the mother. Can you cultivate enough faith in that moment so that the fear begins to dissolve? So there's the first step, the first practice is this working with the fear in terms of basic Buddhist practices, mindfulness, compassion, tantric empowerment. And the other way is just going directly to a deeper faith than that, going to a faith that is deeper than the fear itself. Okay.
If you have the time, Dale, there is one more in the chat. It's
yeah, I've got time.
Great. It's a similar question about finding groundedness. It's from a nurse. She has a hard time integrating practice at her work as a nurse. She has a hard time staying grounded as a nurse.
Got it. So as I said, I have a group in San Francisco, and right now one of the people in the group is one of the head nurses at San Francisco General Emergency Department, where he's been working with COVID cases almost exclusively for the last month or more. And I've had people in that group who are in the palliative care department at San Francisco General, the head of palliative care at St. Francis Hospital. And almost all of these people, when they started coming to my group, were saying, I am burning out. There is so much stress, partly being with patients. A lot of the stress had to do with dealing with the hospital administrative structure not being very supportive or flexible in certain ways. And one guy came to the group, and he had already had to take a 3-month sabbatical because he was so burned out. And people started doing this grounding meditation. Just maybe you're in the hospital, you're going from down the corridor from one room to the next room. As you're doing it, you're doing this grounding breath instead of thinking about what am I going to do with the next patient or what happened with the last one. But you're just taking these short little mini meditations to keep getting grounded, feeling your body, inhabiting your body so that you're not getting lost in the mind. It takes practice. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but this one guy I'm thinking of, I won't mention his name, but he went from being somebody who was burning out and thinking of quitting nursing to becoming the head of the department at a large hospital. And he says it's because of this grounding breath. So it might not be that immediately magical for you. He was very committed because he was so caught in how difficult it was in the hospital environment. And there are some smartphone apps. There's a smartphone app called Insight Timer, which is also a website, Insight Timer. And I've got some meditations on there that I think are free. They used to be. I don't know if they changed that, but one of them is about grounding and centering, and it's right there on the phone. But practice getting grounded, not at the hospital. Practice getting grounded when you're going to the hospital, when you're leaving the hospital, when you're taking a shower, when you're chopping vegetables, when you're doing things that are a lot less emotionally fraught than being at the hospital, so that then you begin to expand the environments in which you can be grounded. But to try to start out doing it in this like really super challenging environment is going to be very difficult. Did you say there was another question, Wyatt?
That looked like the last one that was posted. If you want to give just 1 or 2 minutes for somebody to chap a new question in if they needed to.
Okay, that's good.
Sure. And then, yeah, then we can close out in just a second.
So that, I mean, basically what we're doing here is trying to create a foundation to get to first of all, being able to rest in the heart, and then to go beyond that into the Vajrayana tantric stage of realizing that all of this craziness, all of COVID and all of politics and all of what's happening in the world is a divine unfolding. It doesn't mean that we don't do everything in our power to try to work with it compassionately, but we're not getting lost in resistance. And finally into non-duality, into Dzogchen, Mahamudra, Maha'ati, Advaita Vedanta, the place that Adyashanti, Eckhart Tolle, Ramana Maharshi, Bob Thurman talk about. But these more advanced practices are going to be like pouring nectar into a sieve. It just goes out the holes in the bottom unless we've created this foundation of groundedness and centeredness as a strong foundation for opening the heart.
All right. So it doesn't look like anybody had any other questions. If you're okay, I'll go ahead and close this out.
Sounds really good.
Awesome. Thanks, Dale. All right. So thank you to everybody who has joined and participated with us. In the chat, we will be posting links to menla.org and tibethouse.us, as well as a link to Dale's website, so you can stay in touch with all of our communities online. And we will also post a donation link for Menla, and anything you feel you can give is always deeply appreciated, and we thank you. So Dale also has recurring Wednesday classes, and the next one will be on the 27th, and they'll go all the way until June 17th. So if you would like, you can sign up for those classes and get even more in depth of all of Dale's teachings here. All right, cool. We will post the stuff in the chat, and thank you, and have a good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
All right, and Dale, I'm going to go ahead and stop your video and audio so you'll have privacy, unless you'd like to say anything, of course.
Is everybody there, or could I just talk to you for a second?
No, everybody is still there. So
okay, so I'd like to thank everybody and say goodbye, and then ask you a couple questions about how we're moving forward here. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate the time with you.
This video was brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla Retreat and Dewa Spa membership community. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit tibethouse.us. Tashi Delek, and thanks for tuning in.